Another day, another accusation against Nigel Farage. And like most accusations against the Reform UK leader, it involves fairly large sums of money. So a Sunday Times investigation has claimed the Reform leader accepted freebies from aristocratic convicted fraudster George Cottrell and failed to declare them. Now, according to the Times, Cottrell's generosity included funding Farage's back office, private security, staff, transport and accommodation. The Times also say that 32-year-old Cottrell personally recruited and paid free staff to haul over Farage's social media presence. So that's a lot of support. And it claims Farage used a property rented by Cottrell near Buckingham Palace. Now, here's a key point about the code of conduct for MPs, as explained in this extract from the Sunday Times story. So they say, the code of conduct says MPs must disclose any benefit which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their actions or words on their register of interests. Its overall aim is to protect democracy by upholding the highest levels of transparency. It says MPs must declare any gifts, benefits and hospitality received in the year preceding their election and which relate in any way to their political activities. And the exception is purely personal gifts, such as presents from family. Even then, the code says both the possible motive of the giver and the use of the gift should be considered, clarifying if there is any doubt, the benefit should be registered. And so this is crucial. The Times is saying that Cottrell made many of these donations to Farage during the crucial 12-month period running up to his election as MP for Clacton in July 2024. However, after getting elected, Farage only made a single disclosure relating to Cottrell's support, which was a payment of 9,200 quid to attend a conference in Belgium. So all that other stuff we just told you about, none of that appeared in that register. Farage, as you'll know, is already under a bit of a cloud when it comes to money and donations. I mean, he is already under an investigation by the Standards Watchdog in Parliament over whether he should have declared a £5 million donation from cryptocurrency billionaire Christopher Harborne. Let's just remind ourselves how Farage coped with scrutiny over that one.
People inherit vast sums of money and all sorts of things happen in life.
He's not your dad. You didn't inherit it.
People inherit money.
He's a crypto billionaire living on the other side of the planet, and he gave you... But again, you talked about, you said this is an unconditional gift. Yeah. Is it a gift, a reward, or is it for your security? Because
no, it's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on Ferraris if I wish to. All right?
Are you spending it on Ferraris, or are you spending it on your security?
It's none of your business.
So that was Farage speaking to Julia Hartley-Brewer, who was on loads of TV shows that day, and on each of them, he looked incredibly shifty. He was telling the BBC, it's none of your business what this money was spent on, this £5 million that I got just before an election. Similarly on LBC, he looked as shifty as he has ever looked, and we haven't really seen anything of him since. Back to this latest development, so this story from the Sunday Times over the weekend. So concerning Cottrell, he is an interesting guy, and the Sunday Times have put out a little podcast series about him as well. I listened to episode 1, and it is very interesting. So his nickname is Posh George. He was forced to leave the public school, apparently a very fancy one, Malvern College, before his A-levels due to a gambling addiction. Now, according to the Times, when at the school, he was even found to have walked to a betting shop with 50 grand in cash. Now, of course, all my sympathies to people who end up with gambling addictions. It's a very exploitative industry. Of course, not everyone's sort of with a gambling addiction ends up getting expelled from one of the poshest private schools in the country after going to a betting shop with 50 grand in cash. So it's slightly different to your average situation here. The paper reports that he later became a, quote, fixer cum financier to the ultra-rich in Mayfair before moving into crypto and online gambling businesses. And so one of his businesses, you can gamble in crypto. So combining the two most sort of sinister, pointless industries in the world today. Pointless in the sense that they don't really add any social value. Crypto is gambling. Gambling is obviously gambling. Now, at the age of just 22, Cottrell, who it has been reported calls Farage daddy. And this is only briefly mentioned. I still haven't really understood why he calls Farage daddy. He was made head of financing for UKIP. Now, UKIP, obviously, one of the forerunners to reform. So at just 22, he got that job. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. So in 2014, Cottrell offered to help some American drug dealers launder the proceeds of crime into Bitcoin, as you do. The dealers, though, turned out to be undercover federal agents. And he was arrested in 2016 while on a trip to the US. And this bit's a really great detail because Farage was with Cottrell when he was arrested at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. So Farage was actually there for a speech with Donald Trump. I think it was the trip. You've probably seen it before where sort of Donald Trump is saying how amazing Brexit was. Farage comes up and sort of, says you should also have a revolution in America. Apparently when Cottrell was arrested, many people thought that the police were maybe there for Farage, and it turned out they were there for his pal. Farage later said he couldn't be held responsible for what everyone around him does. Facing up to 20 years in prison, because it's quite a serious crime, Cottrell made a plea deal and served just 8 months for wire fraud. You can see his prison mugshot here. So that's posh George, probably a low point. Now, according to the Times, he told the police that he hadn't intended to launder the money. He was just going to steal it from the drug dealers. Now, if he was that would be a very dangerous thing to do. So if the question here is about judgment, the judgment of the people around Nigel Farage, I'm not sure which displays poorer judgment, trying to help drug dealers launder money, and it turns out that they are federal agents, or trying to steal money off drug dealers. I don't think that normally ends very well from the gangster movies I've seen. It's worth pointing out that Cottrell's dodgy dealings and close association with Farage have been reported for years. So some of this isn't actually new. They're just sort of embellishing with detail. Investigative journalist Carol Cadwallader is one notable example of someone who has been on the story for almost a decade. What is new, as well as sort of some of the texture of the story, because they've interviewed lots of people around Cottrell and Farage, is the alleged donations ahead of Farage's election to Parliament. Reform, as you would imagine, has already started to circle the wagon. So the defence so far is that Cottrell was, quote, an old friend, and that donations were given, quote, in a personal capacity to Farage before he was an MP. Robert Jenrick, former Conservative MP, now Reform MP, a man with very little shame, was on the weekend thrown out onto the media to, I suppose, show that he's capable of defending anything. It went about as well as you'd expect. Here he is on Sky News with Trevor Phillips.
So what's the story then?
You're telling me that.
You've conceded that
I haven't conceded anything.
George Cottrell is an old friend of Nigel's. He's allowed to have friends, and that he supported him before he became a Member of Parliament. Doesn't do so now. What's the story? There is no story here. This is just yet another in a whole chain of smears that's trying to drag Nigel down. And we're sick of it. Let's talk about the things that people actually care about.
Well, let me tell you what they care about. Because I actually do spend a lot of time do I. Like I can assure you, Trevor. Being lectured by people on the buses and the tubes. And one of the things they will care about is seeing Britain's next Prime Minister in the company, day after day, of a man who has been convicted of money laundering. It's not a good look, is it?
He's an old friend of Nigel's.
No,
he has no role.
I don't care if he's an old friend. He's been convicted of money laundering.
He has no role within the form. There's no story here, Trevor.
What the next Prime Minister... Oh, really? You don't mind what our next Prime Minister... who our next Prime Minister hangs out with? You don't care about that.
Trevor, this is
People out there do.
Trevor.
That was Trevor Phillips giving Robert Jenrick a bit of a bollocking. Obviously, Robert Jenrick could have come back and pointed out that Trevor Phillips also has some friends who the public aren't particularly impressed by. He was best man at Peter Mandelson's wedding. Anyway, moving on. Even GB News gave Robert Jenrick a hard time.
So has George Cottrell funded Nigel Farage in the 12 months leading up to the 2024 election?
George is an old friend of Nigel's, and Nigel has good friends who've supported him over the years.
Did he fund him in that 12 months?
He gave him some support before he became a Member of Parliament,
OK, so
but
he
not
funded him
afterwards.
in the 12 months before. Now, according to the Code of Conduct, new MPs must register any benefit received during the 12 months prior to their election which exceeds £300 in value and is in any way related to their political activities. There's a note on the record of £9,200. But if he's been funding security, drivers, staff and accommodation, he's obviously given more money than that, hasn't he?
Well, not necessarily after he became a member of parliament, because
I'm saying in the 12 months before.
Well, the point here, the operative part of the rules that you just described is if this is in a purely personal capacity or not.
Well, it can't be, can it? It's security, drivers, staff to help him with his social media.
Yeah. When he was a GB News presenter, Camilla.
So it should be pointed out that while Farage was a GB News presenter, of course he's still a GB News presenter, he was also at that point in time the honorary president of Reform, so very much involved in politics still. And Jenrick appears intent, as he did across all his interviews on Sunday, on dodging the fact that all donations received in the 12-month period before becoming an MP must be declared. So he's saying it was after he was an MP. So it doesn't matter. But obviously, this register of interest says if it was in the 12 months before you became elected, it also matters for good reason, right? Because if someone is giving you loads of support, which then helps you get elected, that could easily be a situation where you feel like you owe them a favour. It's actually normally before an election that sort of the most aggressive fundraising happens. So that would presumably be one of the most important times to know who's been paying who. On ex-Reform MP Sarah Pochin had this to say, the establishment's attacks on Nigel Farage are becoming relentless. Just as predicted, large parts of the political and media establishment are petrified by Nigel's popularity and the success of Reform UK. They will seize on any story, however old, even those from known adversaries and rooted in past grievances, in an attempt to damage him. His MPs are behind him, his party is behind him, and increasingly the country is behind him too. Now, Ash, it's interesting that Sarah Pochin says the country is behind him too, because it does look like, Reform is still ahead in the polls, although some of them now saying that sort of with Burnham about to become Labour leader, they're looking a lot more neck and neck, Reform and Labour. But Farage's popularity is declining. Reform's polling is declining. Farage seems much less confident, much less open and much less available than he has done in the past. That last set of interviews he did was a complete disaster. I'm not sure if he's going to come and do a bunch of interviews about this Cottrell fellow. So do you think this is a real problem for Reform? Because, obviously the other option is just to say, well, everyone did this about Trump and no one cared.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing I'd say is that there is definitely something which is worth looking at. And I would include to this matter of, Cottrell's donations to Nigel Farage, the payment that Nigel Farage receives from gold companies to front these adverts to the tune of like hundreds of thousands of pounds. And these are adverts which nobody seems to watch. Now, it could be that these are gold companies with vast marketing budgets that they don't know how to spend particularly well. They made a bad bet on a very famous politician. That is possible. It's also possible that this is a way of funneling money to a politician in a way which just makes it past the register of interests, because you make it seem that it's for a form of paid work, advertising, but actually it's something much more like a political donation. And because it's coming through a company structure, there's less scrutiny of the individuals who are actually behind it. So I'll let you work out which one I think is most likely, and also you are free to make up your own minds. Could be a bad marketing bet, could be this other thing entirely. So I do think that there's a story there. But you look at how Farage is choosing to handle it. He's clearly anticipating a Burnham bounce. And he's not a fool. He'll look at the last two by-elections in this country, Makerfield and before that Gorton and Denton, which show that there is a very strong anti-reform vote. So the anti-reform vote in Gorton and Denton swung behind the Greens and Hannah Spencer. In Makerfield, the anti-reform vote swung behind Andy Burnham. Now, there are obviously things that can't be replicated in every single constituency. Makerfield was sort of unique in the sense that it was vote Labour to get rid of the current Labour Prime Minister. But that's something that Farage has to bear in mind. How does he deal with this period of time, which is likely to be something of an upswing for Andy Burnham? So I think what he's elected to do is to hide. Withdraw from the public eye for a bit, don't do loads of media, sit out a period of what he might calculate is going to be Andy Burnham's high watermark, and wait for support to keep ebbing. For Farage, and his point of view. You hope that the salience of immigration never really goes down, that Andy Burnham's embrace of the fiscal rules and certain elements of the Labour manifesto promises from 2024 ties his hands a lot. And then we're back to, your regular scheduled broadcasting of Labour disappointment from which he is then able to benefit. The longer that there is between now and the next general election ultimately benefits Farage, I think. Burnham, in terms of what's being said in Labour circles, is said to be considering a general election in 12 to 18 months. So I think that what we're looking at here is a bit of a wait and hide game. And I think it's really in the gift of Andy Burnham to go, all right, when does he pull the trigger on a general election at the moment, which is most beneficial for him and least beneficial to his rivals on the right, as in Reform, and on the left, as in the Greens?
Now, there is a possibility that if Farage does get rebuked by the Parliamentary Standards organisation, then he could get suspended from Parliament for a certain number of days. And if that happens, then there is an opportunity for his constituents to sign a recall petition, which would mean that there would be a by-election. So he wouldn't be able to hide then because he'd have to fight the by-election. Of course, you could see that as an opportunity for him to regain momentum because he'll be saying this is the establishment trying to bring me down. And it is he would be favourite to win that by-election, although it wouldn't be a walk in the park, but he'd be favourite to win it. And then maybe he could go back to Westminster a bit like Andy Burnham saying I now have this mandate. I've gone against the odds. So that's a possibility. I suppose what I want to ask you about, Ash, though, sort of instead of speculating over Farage's future necessarily, is why is there this relationship between right-wing populists and Bitcoin, sort of gold? Trump, I think, is also sort of always ends up selling gold coins. He's very involved in Bitcoin. Bukele in El Salvador, very involved in Bitcoin. So I remember I was a bit more anarcho, sort of in the 2010s. There were lots of people on the libertarian left who were quite excited about Bitcoin because it was sort of separate from the state. I feel like now Bitcoin is very right-coded. Is that just because sort of libertarianism is much more right-coded than it once was? I suppose another argument is that, because we've had this debate a number of times on the show, sort of where people are saying, well, why are you calling Trump or Farage in any way outside of the establishment because they're so rich? Now, in many ways, they are part of the establishment. They are very rich. But it might be that they're turning to these industries because in sort of like the respected sort of managerial class, well-regulated industries don't really take kindly to the likes of Trump and Farage. And they are in this group of rich outsiders who have to invest in much more sort of unregulated, kind of shifty spaces. I don't know, what are your thoughts about right-wing populism and Bitcoin and gold?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that I think you are right, which is that they are these sort of outsiders within the ruling class. So obviously they are not one of us. They are not a member of the global proletariat, but it's certainly the case that they can be targets for political debanking, for instance. So that gives you a pretty clear incentive to want to be able to keep some of your assets, keep some of your wealth in this sort of unregulated space away from legacy institutions and also the state. But there's a second thing, which is that these are also predatory forms of finance. I mean, crypto is, absolutely riddled with what are effectively like pump and dump schemes, meme coins, rug pulls, that kind of thing. Trump paying the UFC fighters in his own crypto coin, which is what happened, I think, last month in June, is a way of, one, funneling wealth to himself and his family in a way which is separate from political donations, right? So it's buy my coin rather than give me money personally. But then the second thing is that by sort of enveloping this layer of, sporting celebrity into it, is that then he creates an incentive for them to sort of bring their followers and their fans into it. I mean, there is just something in here which is incredibly extractive and incredibly predatory. And I think the third and final thing, and I know I sort of mentioned this already, is that that layer of privacy, of a lack of regulatory oversight, again, means that you can take money from the kinds of people who would ordinarily want to donate to politicians because it's in their benefit to do so. But it's not going to be declared in the same way as on a registry of interest. By its nature, these are much more private, much more difficult to scrutinise transactions.
Yeah, and Farage, obviously he's not in government, so he can't change policy, but he did have a meeting with Andrew Bailey where I thought, where one of the big issues he brought up was crypto regulation. So like they aren't particularly subtle. Trump, of course, we sort of talked about this last week in his sort of financial filings. He's £2 billion richer since he became president, mainly because of crypto, people buying Trump coin and the like. Often that's sort of people who seem to be buying it maybe because they want influence, as Ash says. That's a way to donate without it being particularly transparent. Also, some of it is like his supporters sort of buying it and probably losing a bunch of money, which shows how much he respects them, how much he respects the people who actually get him elected.